So they would wear this girdle on their waist with lots of ghungroos and
Right.
make sure that the ghungroos didn't make a sound. And that showed
Oh
that you were
my,
not moving the rest of your body.
oh my God, I'm tripping on this.
I had a chap write to me and say, if I was to tie up my penis to avoid nightfall, will that cause a problem?
Seema, welcome to the Sid Warrior podcast. This has been a long, long overdue chat. I'm so glad to finally have you sitting across me. I have a ton of questions for you. So I have 1 hour to do it in. Let's see how it goes.
Absolutely. Go for it.
Go for it. All right. The first question is when I came across your Instagram handle, and a lot of people would have their names on the handle, but you have Seema and storytelling. Now that got me very intrigued because that was also the time when I was reading up about narrative therapy, and I read about how everything is a story, and I wondered what made you pick that name.
So I think it's because I trained as a storyteller. My first bit of understanding how to use stories was for narrative therapy. It was for
Oh wow.
bereavement counseling
Okay.
and just understanding how you work through the stories, how you understand things through stories. And I've literally spent my life, Siddharth, understanding how story works in every field. Because at the end of the day, I believe truly that we're not made up of a bunch of molecules and atoms. We are made up of stories.
Yeah.
That's what makes up a human being.
Yeah.
And it is literally by the addition or subtraction or understanding of these stories that we move forward or regress or stay where we are. And
Yeah.
so it is all about stories in my mind because that's what makes sense in the world around us to us. Stories give currency. I mean, they give, that's the currency of a story. It gives meaning to our facts.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so, yeah. So I've always, I think Seema Anand is a very common name as well. We found that there are a lot of Seema Anands out there. I think it must have been the most popular name at one point around the time I was born. So yeah, so I think that just made it different. It was Seema Anand
Mhm.
storytelling because I am primarily a storyteller.
Amazing. I very recently started reading this book. It's called The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr. And I started reading this because I have a talk at the Indian Film Institute next month
Okay.
on the science of
Yeah.
storytelling. And the first line of the book is, "In the end, we will all die." So the concept being that if we're all going to die anyway, then the only way we can find any sense of purpose at all is through stories. So the purpose of a storyteller is to give purpose to everyone else. And I thought that was a beautiful thought.
It's a beautiful thought. As a matter of fact, there's a very old story. I think it's from Sri Lanka
Hmm.
and it was rewritten. And it's about the fact that that's what makes you immortal. It's your story that will live on, or the
Right.
stories that you tell. And I love the idea that the stories become the unicorns, or that they're your footsteps in the sand, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But that is what is remembered afterwards,
Right.
is the story. And
Amazing.
I just think it's incredible. I think the people who brought it into the mainstream, into the corporate world, really, was World Bank. Actually, they're the ones who brought it
Okay.
into the corporate sector to begin with. And what they'd said was they found that they do so much work around the world, around the globe. They have so much information, they have so much experience, they have so much data, but they found that people couldn't find access to that data. They actually couldn't.
Mm.
Their staff could not access the data. And they discovered that the only way of making sure that that data could be accessed was if they took it all and transferred it into stories. So it was a massive project, but
Right.
they literally converted things into stories. And I think that it's just incredible. When we first started, so I've lived in the UK. I live in the UK, as you know.
Hmm.
I've lived here since I got married, which was in December '85. So I've been here a long time.
Hmm.
Storytelling is something that we believed in ancient India in a very big way.
Yep.
We then lost it.
Yep.
Ancient India had all of this and then it lost it. And for a long time, storytelling did not exist.
Mm.
I mean, even today, it's only now starting to come back as an art form,
Right.
but we completely lost it. So the people who brought it back really were the Americans. so when I started working in the corporate sector, the Americans were really happy with this word storytelling. The Brits, the Indians, I mean, it was nonsense to
Not
them.
so much.
And then, yeah, not so much at all. Then gradually over here in this country, in the UK, I started to talk about storytelling. They start to accept it. Some people were open to it, some still weren't. It was a bit of a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
India still was very close to the idea. Now they have opened up, and they've opened up in a big way. So I've done a lot of keynote talks around corporates in India
Right.
on the power of storytelling, because just explaining to people that every effective leader through history has used stories to communicate their message.
Right.
You know, you tell a story. There's a story, Siddharth. I'm sorry, do we have,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
is it okay if we just chat about stories? Because
Please,
to me,
let's
this is
start.
where it started.
Yes.
So there's a story that is told about, and I think it comes from the Jewish folklore. But basically, it's about this guy who decides one day that he wants to be the best archer in the world.
Right.
So he's going to learn how to apply the bow and arrow, but he's going to be the best.
Right.
So he goes from one land to the other, trying to find the right teacher, and he can't, and he keeps looking. And then finally, he gets to a forest where every single tree, and the trees are growing really close to each other, and yet every single tree has a target drawn on it. Dead center, there is an arrow. And he's like, this is amazing. This is the guy I want for my teacher, because
Right.
I mean, some of those arrows were impossible to shoot.
Right.
So he goes looking, and the people of the village direct him to the guy that they call the village idiot. They say, you want to go and talk to him? He's the stupid man. He has no brains. You know, we call him the fool, but yeah, you can talk to him. So he goes to him and he says, how did you shoot these arrows? How did you get them dead center? He says, it's simple. I shoot the arrow, then I paint the target around it. And for me, that's actually the magic of a story. You tell the story, you let it drop.
Yeah.
You see the ripples going out. Everybody will take from the story whatever makes sense to them.
Yeah.
And once they pick that up, you then go in with what your message has to be.
Yeah.
So everybody learns from it just what they want to learn. So I think stories are absolute magic. Yes, they're very powerful.
So when you told me that story and your interpretation of it, I felt like every story is a Rorschach test. You just put a story out there, you see how different people interpret it, and you can tell a lot about them from the way they interpret your story.
Yeah, which bit they will take from it.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned that Indian mythology or Indian history had a lot of stories in it. And today, I think we can call them mythology stories. Would that be something that you relate to?
I think that the Indian stories are absolutely fantastic. I think that unfortunately, a lot of people don't like the word mythology because they don't, like we were saying, you listen to a story, you take from it what makes sense to you.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't understand the meaning of the word mythology, so it becomes objectionable. So let's just call it Indian folk tales or folklore. Indian tales or ancient Indian stories.
Right.
Yeah, it's just easier.
Yeah.
Causes less problem.
I came across this. I came across this conflict because I once did a session on how a neuroscientist would interpret certain stories from the Ramayana. So in Ramayana, there is one story of Ahilya, who was tricked by Lord Indra, and he came to her as dressed up as a husband, and then her husband cursed her to be a stone, and then she remained a stone until years later Lord Ram came to her and brought her back. And it occurred to me that, hey, this could be a very nice interpretation of depression, where if your husband accuses you of something that you haven't done and you go into that a very dark place and you don't talk to anybody, you don't want to meet anybody, and then you find the right person who can talk to you in a way that helps you and changes your narrative. Now, when I described this story,
I had an amazing idea. I love it.
I'm so glad. I really wanted to hear what you think about it.
It's so apt. It's so good. I'll tell you in a minute what more there is about this. But yeah, go on. I like what you're saying.
So in that description, I had written that these are interpretations of mythological stories. And I got a lot of flack for that, because the majority of the comments were, "Oh, you think these are mythological stories? You clearly don't know our history." And that's the first
Yeah,
time I realized this
unfortunately.
conflict.
I unfortunately, like I said, also words mean different things to us.
Hmm.
So I realized this when I first started doing my work on the arts of seduction, which is also the title of the first book. It's the
Yeah,
title of my first TED talk.
yeah.
The word seduction means so many different things to so many different people because it's taken on the burden of societal disapproval over the
Hmm.
centuries.
Hmm.
So seduction is just become a bad word.
Yep.
You can never quite get it right. So yeah, I don't argue the point anymore about whether there's stories, whether it's history, what it is, because it's no point. It derails the argument.
Right.
It derails the point you're trying to make. So I
Hmm.
think some things, you pick your battles. So you say,
Hmm.
okay, let's call them our ancient stories.
Right.
And I'm happy with being able to do that.
Hmm.
I think that the story of Ahalya is an incredible one.
Hmm.
I discovered much later because there are other stories that are similar to this from the Skanda Puran, for instance.
Hmm.
And the idea was that when you turn somebody into a stone,
Hmm.
what happened was that you excommunicated them, you threw them out of society, you took away their voice,
Right.
you made them voiceless.
Right.
Till somebody comes back and gives you the power of that voice again and says, you are accepted back in society.
I got it.
Yeah.
I get what you mean.
And
Yeah.
that's the idea of, but like I said, that there's nothing hard and fast about any of this. It's supposed to be a lesson.
Yeah.
And I think that what you said is amazing. But I love your interpretation. So yeah, just change a couple of words and go with it.
Go with it. Thank you so much. When you read about Indian history and Indian stories, is there one particular book that you wish everybody would have read that covers this topic?
Yeah, I wish that. So, okay, I discovered when I started working on the Kamasutra that it's a treatise. It's
Yep.
a scientific treatise. It was written in metaphor, like any other treatise. So it's actually a really important work in the fact that it gives us a certain vocabulary, because it
Hmm.
is that metaphoric vocabulary that then went on to inspire about 2000 years of our classical Sanskrit and Tamil literature. And we don't know what those terms mean. Little
Yeah.
things, like my smallest example that I can give you is the jingling girdle.
Right.
So the Kam Sutra, which has a tiny chapter on positions,
Hmm.
it's not a big chapter, it's only a
Hmm.
small one
Hmm.
compared to the rest of it.
Sure.
But basically, in our literature, which is a lot of very romantic literature, you have lovers coming together.
Right.
But it never says that, they got into this position, they did this.
Yeah.
Each position was indicated through a piece of jewelry. So, and each piece of jewelry was not because, oh, let's be prudes and let's not talk about it. It's because women were taught how to do that position with how that jewelry moved on their body. So I started with this girdle. I mean, it's amazing. The thought is amazing. That's why I said that the language is so different. So if you were going to be on top, the woman in ancient cultures was never
Yeah.
supposed to be on top. It
Okay.
was like a position of power. So in
Right.
the Abrahamic, the Judaic stories, you're never supposed to be on top. The
Okay.
Kama Sutra says you can be on top, but you have to do this by moving your hips. So you don't move your upper part of your body, you only move your hips.
Right.
Okay. So they would wear this girdle on their waist with lots of ghungroos and
Right.
make sure that the ghungroos didn't make a sound. And that showed
Oh
that you were
my.
not moving the rest of your body.
Oh my God. I'm tripping on this.
Is right. Yeah. And so every time you read in a story, she came with her jingling girdle, or they came, you understand that these are highly skilled courtesans, or this is
Yeah.
going to be the lover for the night, or whatever. But yeah, you need to understand those things to be able to understand what they were talking about.
All right.
And
Okay. I need to so right after this conversation ends, I'm going to go and do my research on Kama Sutra. So I have actually read a version of the Kama Sutra. So it was like an English translation, but this was around 7 to 8 years ago. Clearly, there's a
so
lot that
I
I've
have to
missed.
warn you. No, I have to warn you that you see, the problem is that it's this vocabulary that's been lost, which
Right,
is what my research is about translating and decoding this. So when I
right,
wrote my book, for instance, it was just literally to decode the
right.
words that I use so that, for instance, okay, I'll give you an example. Nalan, you know the story of Nal and Damayanti? Okay,
Uh,
it's a very
can you
famous
remind me?
love story.
Yeah,
Okay, it's a famous love story. It's one of those miserable love stories where the two of them are married, then they're separated, and then Damayanti goes through all this hellish stuff till
yeah,
finally, at the end, through trials and tribulations, they're brought back
yeah,
together. Anyway, it's a particularly famous story from our ancient literature.
yeah.
And there's this part right in the beginning when they're married where Nal sends a message through her maid
Hmm,
to Damayanti, to his new bride.
hmm,
And he says to the maid, he says, tell her that the kisses that she desires are forbidden to me,
hmm,
which basically meant that in some parts of the country, in many parts of the country at that point, the rule was that between 3 and 6, you basically stopped making love. That was the time that you woke up, you did your prayers, and you started your day.
hmm,
Okay, so kissing was okay till 3 p.m.
hmm.
Sorry, till 3 a.m.
3
But
a.m.
you didn't kiss. Yeah, in that prahar, in that section, that 3
Right.
hour section between 3 and 6,
Yeah,
you got up, you did your puja, you did your bath, and so on.
yeah.
Now, it categorizes, the Kamasutra categorizes women into 4 categories, and one of them is the Padmini. And the Padmini, it says, can only come to orgasm in the hours of dawn. So he's saying to her, she's looking dissatisfied, and he's saying, I'm sorry, those kisses that she desires are forbidden to me. Now, you see what I mean? You understand that? You suddenly know, okay, what the hell is he talking about? This is what I
Oh
mean. This is
man.
what we lost.
Oh my God. All right. So, um, I have so much, I have so many questions. Let me organize my thoughts for a second. Let's take the last one that you said. 4 different types of women based on the way or the time in which they orgasm.
No. So the categories are based on partly on physiology. So
Okay.
partly on what they look like from the outside, partly on their humors, partly on their mental makeup, and so on. So they're actually
Right.
categorized.
Yeah.
And when you read them today in modern interpretation, they don't necessarily sound very nice because we don't have a background for it.
Sure.
But the idea was that each one finds pleasure in a different way. And it
Right.
was extremely important. Sorry, there's just some funny sounds coming from outside.
No worries.
And it was extremely important to understand that if you were going to be this woman's lover, it was important to understand what she was like so that you could pleasure her properly.
Yeah.
I think it's a fantastic idea. And so each one is, as I said, for instance, the Anandaranga, which
Mhm.
is the version of the Kamasutra written in around 1300 and something. Because there's so much of our literature got lost because it was written on palm leaf
Yeah.
and then it got destroyed.
Yeah.
So there is a little part that I didn't find in the original Kamasutra, but I found in the Anandaranga, which says
Mhm.
that each of these 4 categories of women come to arousal in different environments, in their best arousal in different
Ooh,
environments.
got it.
Okay, so some by the seaside, some in the woodland, some on top of a hill, etc. And in our story Kadambari, which is another
Mhm.
romance from times gone by, when the prince enters the princess's quarters, he goes from one apartment to the next, and each one is done up with murals, which are painted to be like the seaside, and it feels like he's over there. And then the next one is like he's on a hilltop, and it feels like it. And this is why they
Got
were
it.
there.
Got it. So
So we
beautiful.
have yeah, it is just utterly exciting to think that, so there was so much time and effort spent on decoding pleasure.
Yeah.
I won't say sex, I'll say pleasure.
Yeah.
And that was taken away. So sex was never taken away because sex is important to have your children,
Yeah.
humanity going. Pleasure was deemed unnecessary.
Right. And worse, it was deemed as a sin.
Yeah.
That's
Because the only way that you can get rid of it is if you call it a sin. So it was
right.
basically made into a sin, and we're still trying to get rid of the terminology, the vocabulary around the sin.
Right. And I feel that over the last 100, 200 years, uh, every human being has been on a journey to reclaim that pleasure in their own lives, but not publicly. Maybe everybody always, ever since it was taken away from us, we have all been on our individual journeys of reclaiming it. The only thing is we can't talk about it in public. We can't talk about it on the internet. There is a lot of interest in the Kama Sutra in the West. I think they identify with it as tantric, as part of the tantric
Yeah,
sex.
a
What
whole
is
lot of
that?
nonsense.
What
Because
is that? What is happening?
so one is that the Kamasutra has been translated as, so initially the first person who translates it into English after it's been lost for many years is a man called Richard Burton, who lives in the 1800s sometime, and he comes along and he translates it. He translates it basically under his erotica. So he translates it as an erotic text. He takes whatever is given to him, and from that, whatever other people understand, they take from it. And one of the words that people understand is positions. And, for a country like England, like the UK, which is going through its Victorian era of prudery, this idea that there is a nation where a book has been written about sex, about positions, is just so unusual that they're all like, okay, we want to read this. Now, there is something over here at that point called the Obscene Literature Act. And so he can be imprisoned for translating and writing this or publishing it. So he opens a club called the Kamasutra Society. And under the thing of saying, I'm writing for a private club, he then publishes these books. Anyway, basically all that goes from there, because basically the only thing people understand is positions. And that's what it gets translated at. If you ask most Indians, they think it's a book about positions. Most people don't know. Now, in the West, they still don't understand what it is, but a lot of them have started to filter into their consciousness that it's not a dirty book about positions. It's a spiritual book, and they take the idea of spirituality, especially when it comes to Eastern spirituality, very seriously. So it's just a bit of a silly derivation, if that's what it comes down to, because they've taken the lack of information, put it together, and tried to make something out of it. If you mention the word tantra in India, people think it's black magic. If you try saying to them it's a philosophy, they don't get it. I have lectured on tantra in some of the YPOs, some of the people with the most amount of access to privilege and education. And still they will turn around and say, but that's just black magic. Should you be talking about that? I have had people saying to me, we can't have Seema in our house because she's tantric. I'm powerful.
Of course, it's the white hair. It's always the white hair.
It's so many things.
It's so many things.
Powerful, darling.
Yeah. People see the full moon reflected in you and all of that.
Yeah. And there's just so much that I don't really know how to get past that. You try and explain that this is what it means. Yes, there is a lot of sexo-yogic practices in Tantra, but they are literally practices based on certain things. People will take part of that and think they understand. So this whole idea of retaining your semen, a lot of people believe that they can retain it, they can pull it back up their spine, they can take their semen to their brain, and that's going to make them feel more energized. That is not what it says in Tantra. But I cannot sit and explain it in 60 seconds on a reel.
Right.
And I'm actually done trying. So I only now do this for people who really want to understand.
Right.
There's no point doing it for everybody else, because it's like swimming upstream.
Yeah. And swimming upstream for no reason, which is even
For no
worse.
reason, yeah. And it's just trying to say to people, there's no such thing as tantric sex. There's no such thing as tantric sex. It's no point saying it, because they are determined to believe that there is. So,
They want to
Sting
believe.
had it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sting had it.
Of
If
course
we have
he did.
tantric sex, I mean, I can go for hours like Sting did. You don't know. And secondly, frankly, nobody wants you to be thrusting away into them for hours. Really, you don't.
Yeah.
That's not pleasure. Stop now.
So if I may confess, when I was in London the last time, I found a very nice bookshop. It was on witchcraft, spells, and tantric, all things tantric. I spent a very
Where was it? In Russell
pleasurable.
Square.
Yes.
I know which one you mean.
Right next to the British Museum,
Yeah.
down the road.
Yeah.
Yep.
I love that bookshop.
So did I. I spent a very pleasurable 2 hours looking through everything. I learned a few. I learned how to spot witches, and it was really interesting. And I love the atmosphere that London has. Once it gets a little dark, you can. It's a whole different city.
The whole different city. And you know what? Actually, the museums at night, the next time you're here, you need to go to the museums at night. They have a whole different feeling to that. The aura changes. It's amazing. It's very, very amazing.
It is. And I can totally understand why witches would still exist in London, because I think the atmosphere is conducive for that. You can,
we call them goddesses.
Of course.
We think that we're very powerful and we're goddesses, but I think that people are also here trying to change the idea of witch, like what does it actually mean? So I have a really good friend called Sydney Moore, who's an author, and she owns the Witchcraft Museum of Essex, which is a conceptual museum. I love the idea. It's not a physical space.
Okay.
It's a conceptual museum.
Okay.
So it's on the web, and it's in your mind, and it's got stories.
I love that.
And it's just amazing. Yeah. It's just fabulous.
Oh man. Yeah, like why need physicality when you can have it all in your head? Because it's like when you say the fantasy is the best part of sex. Everything else is just an excuse. It's all about the story that you guys have created together.
Yes.
Something you said about semen retention. I've been very, very keen on understanding why in Indian culture the concept of the brahmachari exists. Yeah.
I think again it's one of those things, Siddharth, that needs a certain amount of explanation. So I think that they had initially, as part everything. So there's a wonderful story. Let me start from here. At the start of the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Yep.
And it is Narad Muni, Ved Vyas talking to Narad Muni. And Vyas is saying to Narad, he says, I just don't know what to do. I have taken every single thing that any human being could ever possibly need in their lifetime. Between us, we have taken every concept, every detail, every idea, and we have written texts on it. So that to explain every little bit to them. And yet nobody's reading them, and people are falling into depression, and society is falling into disrepair.
Right.
And Narad says to him, he says, it's because you made it too complicated. Who's got the time to, go and figure out, I'm feeling like this, abo wali kitab pakdo, let me read it, let me find the bit that pertains to me. It's just too difficult. Tell stories instead.
Right.
And so, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the stories are told so that, the King Parikshit, who's about to die in 7 days, can achieve redemption, that he can get moksha.
Right.
But basically, the idea is that these stories were created to explain how things should be done or how things work or what a philosophy is. Over time, through various reasons, we lost those stories because they were dismissed. People said, "Ye to bachon ki kahaniyan," half the things went from there, half the meanings disappeared. So we don't have either now. We don't have the capacity to understand what the text says, because it's not as easy as just translating it and knowing it. You know, if it's like you read one verse from the Bhagavad Gita, you could spend a month on that one couplet, trying to understand the meaning behind it. That is the same with any of these texts. It's deep. You have to understand it. And so I think the sad thing is that we really don't understand what this is meant to be. Now, you know, some of the scholars will explain that it was about holding on for, you know, it's not about that, okay, let's go for
Release.
it, finish it.
Yeah.
If you are waiting to get somewhere, if you're waiting to do so, if you say, okay, again, backtracking, the idea is that pleasure is a Shakti.
Yeah.
It's an energy.
Yeah.
Okay. It rises through you. You cannot divide it up, and if your Shakti is coming up, this is what I mean about what you think pleasure is. Pleasure is a Shakti. When it rises through you, you can't say, "Acha ji, ye Shakti ko hum padhai ke liye use kar lenge, ye Shakti hum iske liye," you know, it's a Shakti. It energizes you in many, many different ways. You understand and practice and arouse that Shakti because it's supposed to elevate you.
Right.
So the language that was used, like I said, you know, all these beautiful ideas, the acts, the thoughts, the practices, were all supposed to be that, you know, if you say that your path to, like, your life is basically 3 steps: dharma, artha, kam, so that you can achieve moksha.
Yeah.
Dharma, artha, kam, so you can achieve moksha. So kama is a very important part of your life. It's not a side option. It's a very important part of your life.
Right.
But in our literature, karma is never random. It's very procedural. It is very procedural. It's full of rules because it was supposed to raise your consciousness. It was supposed to raise you to higher levels so that you could achieve moksha.
Right.
So at no point can you just be that random about it. So even when you are making love, there is a whole purpose to it. It is energy being aroused and energy being used and energy being harnessed.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And till today, we will say to people that each time you have sex, you don't always have to come as a man.
Right.
Sometimes don't come. It
Yeah.
changes your orgasm. It changes other things in you. So there were reasons for it. Wasn't that you just don't ever ejaculate, you never expel your semen, that you can pull it back up, you can do this, that, and the other. The Rishi Munis who said or who mentioned that they can do certain things, bloody hell, they took like 50 years of serious meditation to be able to get there. Some young guy, you know, who's decided, I'm going to be
edging
out there influencing young men, you know, and what to do. I'm sorry, but you don't understand something like that quickly.
Right.
Don't diminish the stuff that is out there. So the idea was that everything was procedural. You start your life in brahmacharya. Again, it is people's interpretation of brahmacharya that gets them to this point. It's not necessarily what it is, because nightfall, as you know, as a medic, is natural and it's involuntary.
Right.
Nobody out there was tying up. I had a chap write to me and say, if I was to tie up my penis to avoid nightfall, will that cause a problem? I mean,
oh no,
you know,
oh no.
Yeah. So there are people doing all sorts of things, and it's not just here. I mean, there's that guy, the story of the guy called Boston Corbett. I think again 1800s in America. He had an involuntary erection one day when he decided he didn't want to. And so he went home, took scissors, and he just chopped off his testicles, literally. And he was mad.
Yeah.
He then went off for service in church and then went to the hospital.
That's
Yes,
another
he was
power
mad.
of stories. Yeah. Right. I wanted to get to the last part of our conversation because I feel you are somebody who I could very easily spend 3 hours and not know about it. So I had some topics that I really wanted to cover with you, some things that have been bothering me personally, which one of them is love in the time of the digital age. So
Mhm.
how does sex change when everybody's meeting on Tinder, on dating apps, and all sexual contact starts not through body language but through emojis and sexting? Do you feel that there is a change in the way that we approach sex?
I think that definitely there is a change in the way that we approach sex. And I think that the millennials, where it began,
Mhm.
um, maybe found it more difficult because that was the transition period.
Yeah.
I look at Gen Z now and I actually see a very different attitude amongst them because, like you said, they are used to meeting people digitally.
Yeah.
They will read up the person's ideas. They have this thing in their head about what they like and what they don't like. And for them, it's really important to know. So, for instance, one of the things is it's important for them to know whether the person feels the same way about them when it comes to climate change. You know, today in the
Mm,
West, that is one of the biggest deal breakers if you
right.
think differently about climate change.
Yeah.
There is, you know, what do you think about equality for women, etc. So
Or
all these
Trump.
things are there, Trump, or Trump, but all these things are already there.
Right.
You know, I was saying to somebody that one of the things that is apparently getting people to swipe right a lot is
Mhm.
if you say in your profile, I have a sense of adventure, I like to go adventuring. That
Mm,
suddenly makes you sexy.
mm,
So people are understanding what kind of people they want to be with.
right.
Then they meet up with somebody. I think also this generation, um, I know people don't agree with me, but I personally think that they're a lot more sensible.
Mhm,
They have a lot more knowledge and information on sex.
mhm.
They have everything at their fingertips when it comes to porn or, you know, whether it comes to answers or anything,
Right.
anything.
Right.
They are no longer dependent on what mommy or daddy tells them. They ask Siri, they
Yep.
ask Alexa,
Yep.
they get information without anybody kind of beating around the bush.
Yep.
And a lot of them have come from broken homes. A lot of them are children of divorced parents.
Yep.
And so they understand that they don't want to jump into relationships. A lot of them are independent, they work. So
Mhm.
they know that they don't need somebody else for their stability. They feel they have to become stable before they start a relationship.
Yeah.
So I just think that all of that makes such a huge difference. And they understand this idea that there are different genders, different sexualities, and
Yeah.
they are exploring because they are now in a world where it's normal to explore.
Right.
And so they they're not going out there to settle down, they're still exploring, I think.
Mm, mm,
And whereas I think that, I mean, if I had to go back into the dating game, I would say to my husband, can you please make sure that you don't pop it before I do, because I don't want to go into the day. And I say to him, can you please make sure you behave, because I don't want to have to divorce you and then have to go and look for somebody new, because that'll be a pain. I cannot understand the idea of um, having to go digital and look for somebody.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
I like the idea of meeting somebody, of connecting, whether I like their smile, you know, you look into their eyes and you think, actually, I quite like you.
Yeah.
I, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I need to be able to connect to somebody.
Yeah.
And I just don't think I could cope with digital dating. But and again, I listen to my kids, my daughter particularly, and her friends, and they will they will dissect a message. So I didn't know, for instance, that the thumbs up emoji is rude.
Oh, is it?
Apparently, yeah, you only do that if you're trying to be really patronizing and rude to somebody. And it's
Oh
like, so
no.
do I have to always say, okay, that's fine? And they were like, no, you could do that, you know, that emoji,
Oh,
which is like this.
This one? Oh, this one.
Yeah, this one.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so that
Wow.
one is okay. I was like,
Uh,
but yeah, apparently you
when did
cannot.
this
Yeah, you can
happen?
do that.
I'm thinking of
I
all
woke up
the
one
Gen
day
Z
and I
friends
was
I must have lost doing this.
apparently the other thing that's a no is a full stop. A full stop is rude beyond words. I was like, I have good punctuation. I went to a good school.
I can't
What
stop my full
punctuation is that?
stops. It's not possible. It's instinctive at this point. I
I know.
put commas and apostrophes where I have to.
I put apostrophes, I put exclamation marks, I do the whole lot.
Of course.
But yeah, full stop is supposed to be bad.
Oh my God.
I mean,
Okay.
so the other day, there was this, something happened, there was some
Sure.
drama. And my daughter and her best friend were sitting here and they were showing me this text. And it read as like a normal, and she said, oh, that is just brutal. But why is it brutal? Said, because look at the full stop. Okay, but that full stop made it brutal. And
I'm
I'm
learning
like,
so
okay,
much.
I just, so, because I always complain that when she sends me a message, when my daughter sends me a message, I get 20 things.
Yeah.
Like I'll get 20, because she'll put one word literally. And I'll say to
Yes.
her, put it in one, put full stops. No, you can't put a full stop.
Because then they are just typing for like 5 minutes and then it's just 2, 3 words, 2, 3 words, 2, 3 words. Just send it all together. Organize your thought and
No,
tell
it's
me.
not about that. Their thoughts are all organized, probably better than ours, but
Yeah.
they can't put full stops because that is rude.
Wow. All right. I am learning so much more than yeah, so you've just changed my entire sexting philosophy.
Yeah, you need to up your game, babe.
I need to up my game. Wow.
Because you never know what you're writing and how it's going to be received.
Yeah.
I mean, I have bad eyesight. So one day I was typing without my this thing, and I put this, where I thought I was doing one with one eyebrow up, but apparently that is now considered a wink. I was like, you know what? I'm sorry. Let me just
When did
find
this
the end
happen?
of the world and jump off. I'll go to the edge and I'll jump off. I can't take this anymore. I'm going to a different planet.
Yeah, our only hope is that we are considered adorable and not stupid.
I think that ship has sailed, darling. Sorry.
Damn it.
If you are using full stops, sorry. You might be
Damn.
adorable, but stupid goes with the territory.
Oh no. Okay. I'm in love with this conversation. There is so much that I have to take home and think about. Seema, thank you so much. I knew it would be a pleasure, but it was still unexpected how much of a pleasure it was.
Oh, thank you. You're very welcome, Siddharth. It was lovely talking to you as well. I've really enjoyed chatting with you.